Here, new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Humble Pie, and I've had some requests to feature some of their music. And Humble Pie formed in England in 1969 and literally exploded in the early 70s. And the group was fronted by the late great guitar legend Steve Marriott. Also, Peter Frampton was involved in the band, and also Greg Ridley from Spooky Tooth, bassist and vocalist. And I think they had like a 17-year-old drummer too. But one of the first supergroups, as they were dubbed, because when they formed, the members came from other bands, and Steve Marriott came from Small Faces, very popular, early British rock group. Small Faces morphed into Humble Pie, and then eventually, Peter Frampton left to start his solo career. And it's interesting the way that Small Faces and Humble Pie kind of shifted back and forth depending on what Steve Marriott was doing. But without question, Humble Pie rocked back in the 70s, and Peter Frampton and Steve Marriott are a big reason for it. Tragically, Steve Marriott died in a house fire in 1991, so his name is kind of fading, it seems like, every year. It seems like more and more people aren't aware of who he is, they're not really aware of Humble Pie. It seems like everybody knows 30 Days in the Hole, but then that's it. It's like the rest of their catalog of music is kind of unknown to most rock fans. But it's really interesting to notice, the influence that not only Humble Pie had, but the group that Steve Marriott was in before Humble Pie, Small Faces. Small Faces directly influenced Led Zeppelin, and supposedly Robert Plant was a huge Small Faces fan. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant used to go see Small Faces live, and then the next thing you knew, Led Zeppelin blew up around the same time that Humble Pie did. But there's a certain song, a very famous song, originally penned by Willie Dixon, that's kind of there wasn't really like a trial or any lawsuits or anything like that, but there's a very similar link between a Small Faces tune and a Led Zeppelin tune. And here's an image kind of revealing some of this. So the music in this episode is going to come from 4 different Humble Pie albums, and this is during Peter Frampton's time with the band and then also post-Frampton. But there's a lot of music, in their catalog, and I had to kind of pick, what I wanted to feature. There's a lot of albums I didn't include, in this lesson or whatever. But there's some great music to be had, even if it's not really that well known. A lot of this music they never play on the radio, but when you hear it and you realize like how it influenced a lot of music that came after this, it's historic, it's very important, very influential, pioneering, and really interesting to tap into some of these lesser known, icons of classic rock music. So here we go. With the opening, that's The Fixer from the Smokin' album, and it's something like this. It starts with this chromatic walk up right here. Start on that C sharp, and you're going to end on G sharp right here. So it's not quite a chromatic scale, but we're moving chromatically through those notes right here. When you stop on that G sharp, go back to C sharp, and you're going to go all the way up to A right there. When you get to that A note, just add vibrato like that. And then you're starting to bounce off that A note with the open A. And then you got these little double stops. And this is actually a second guitar, but there's an A minor pentatonic lick right here. I'm not sure who's playing that. Could be Frampton, but you're doing. Go back to that A riff. And you start hearing this. Right there, it's an A7 sharp 9. Think the Hendrix chord, but it's not this, fingering. It's this fingering. So right there you've got. That A7 sharp 9, slide that off, and then you've got this A minor pentatonic lick right here. Right, little bend, and then going back to that G note. And then do that A7 sharp 9 again and slide it off. And then these hammer-ons. And then you're kind of doing like A blues. Like that. That swampy kind of slow funk groove happening there. It's really cool. Up next is Stone Cold Fever from the Rock On album, and this is totally a 70s classic rock, riff like this. Actually two guitars here, and I'm going to use the TC Electronic Ditto Looper to kind of show both those parts in just a second. But that first riff, you're just banging on this E power chord, and you're going to slide that off, and then you're sliding into a single B note right there, and then a B power chord like this, and then a B power chord, the D power chord, the A power chord, and then do it again. And then you hear this riff. So that E power chord and then a trill between D and E. And then that same B, D to A power chords. So I'm not really sure who's playing what here, but a lot of early Humble Pie, with Frampton and Marriott, they had these really cool, like, dual guitar things. So one guitar is doing that. And the other guitar does. It's a lower E power chord. And you're playing the harmony of that other trill. Like this. Really cool to hear those harmonized trills like that. It's very simple, but really effective, and it just rocks out. Next up is a nifty little number like you from the first Humble Pie album, As Safe as Yesterday, and this song reveals some more of that two-guitar interplay between Marriott and Frampton. And the first guitar basically opens it like this. Something like that. It's basically A major to an A sus4 right there. Add that D note, and then an A5 right there. And I'm also hearing the high E open with that chord. And then back to the A sus4, and then A major, A sus4, A major, A sus4 with a little hammer on. And then loop that riff. other guitar is playing kind of a harmonized version of that, and I'm not sure who's playing what, but I'm going to loop this once again with the TC Electronic Ditto looper. But guitar 2 is basically doing this. And right there, it's really, you know, kind of a modification of the first guitar, because the first guitar was doing this, and the second guitar is doing, so it's A major, and then you're moving back to this kind of implied A7 sus2, because there's a G and a B right there with that open A, and then this is kind of like an A6, and then you're doing that shift from that A6 back into that A7 sus2, which is kind of hard to do, because you're moving from a, you know, a fret gap between your fingers to where they're side by side and there is no fret gap. So you're having to kind of compress that fingering together. You could also do it like this, and switch to your middle finger right there and keep that third finger on the D, or that little magic trick with your fingers right there. And you put those guitar parts together and it sounds like this. Next up is the song Come On Everybody from the Smokin' album, and once again there's a split between the two guitar parts. Now Smokin' doesn't have Peter Frampton, so this is something that Marriott continued to do after Frampton left. And obviously he likes, you know, kind of composing these dual guitar parts that are working together, but they're also doing, you know, noticeably different things. So Come On Everybody, something like this, like the first guitar, really standard, like rock and roll, kind of bluesy rock and roll riff right there. You know, that A to A6 to A7. And then the second guitar is playing with that and doing like that, you know, A double stop on the top, and then this partial, you know, D chord right there, and then you're hammering on from that C to C sharp, you know, the minor to major third of A. Right? You put those guitars together and it sounds like this. Eventually you hear this. Something like that. So like a big A to a big D power chord there. And this like single note riff. And then back to that A power chord, and then do the A to D again. And the second riff. Down there. Just adding a little bit, you know, the second time through. But that's a really cool song, and I love those splits between the guitar parts where they do different things and then they come together and do the same thing. Really powerful. Up next we got 30 Days in the Hole from the Smokin' album, arguably Humble Pie's most famous song, and also the band Mr. Big did a great cover of this song back in the day. And I'm going to play this without the tremolo or vibrato effect. It has this, you know, kind of shaky, you know, modulation effect for sure. I don't know if it's a rotary effect or what's going on there. Could be a Leslie cabinet, I have no idea. But I'm going to play this without that effect. That way you can actually see and hear, you know, what's going on. 30 Days in the Hole, something like this. So it's interesting because, well, you're starting with this D to E power chord. And then you're doing this 70s inversion of that A over C sharp to a E over B, technically, right here. And that's really all that's happening for the most part in the beginning right there. And it's matching the vocal, melody rhythm or whatever. So the guitar and the lyrics or the vocals are kind of synced up together right there. And then you hear the verse start right there. Fill right there, and then go right back in the verse. And at the end, it's just like a D power chord to an A, and then right into the chorus. Last but not least is Earth and Water Song from the album Humble Pie, and you can see I've switched to an acoustic guitar. And this is a Peter Frampton moment. I read somewhere like he, basically played this and put this together. And this is, definitely proof that you don't have to write a really difficult or advanced or shreddy, guitar part to write great music. This is really basic, but it really resonates. I mean, it's a really interesting guitar part. I love stuff like this. Something like this. It's really basic, but it sounds so musical and interesting. The first time I heard it, I just fell in love with this. But it's basically, it's part of a D major chord. But he's not really doing it like that. I'm hearing it like this, just a little piece of that chord. I'm also hybrid picking there and picking, the D string with my pick and plucking the fretted notes with my fingers, like that. And then you're hearing that D major, change to D sus4 with that G note. And then you're hearing this, and that's basically a little piece of A minor 7. Now you could play this with full chords if you wanted to, like that, and then the A minor 7 you could do like this, but I don't hear that. I don't hear those big bulky chords. I'm just hearing little partial chords and fragments of chords. And then you hear this. Right there you're doing that C and high E open together, and then D and F sharp together, and then E and G together, and then back to that D and F sharp. So that's almost like a little classical moment right there. Right? And then you hear in, and then you do it again like this. These slid chords like this. So right there, that's basically what, A add 9, and then you're going to move down to this, like an A7 sus2. We saw that earlier in the lesson, and then you're doing this A6. And then right there, that's kind of like an A7 sus2, because you're just really fretting that E note on the D string, and everything else is open, like that. I like that part too. Something like that. Very influential too. You got to think, definitely Led Zeppelin had hit the scene around the same time Humble Pie did. And they both had these hard rockin' songs and acoustic moments too. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Humble Pie. And once again, another kind of obscure band. Steve Marriott's not really a household name. With certain people he is. But for most people on the street, if you asked people on the street, who's Steve Marriott? You know, they probably think maybe he had something to do with the hotels or something. They probably wouldn't think of Small Faces or Humble Pie, unfortunately, simply because, like I said, he passed away, you know, 1991. His name and some of his legacies kind of faded a little bit, you know, as far as like the public eye. And definitely Peter Frampton, you know, has brought him up and paid tributes and played concerts and stuff like that. So, I mean, there are pockets of people that know exactly who this is and they know this music, but most people on the street really don't. And that's a shame because it's really inspiring, really good music. And I'm a sucker for great, lesser known, you know, 70s and 80s, you know, rock and rock musicians. And not just rock, though. I mean, funk, jazz, blues, anything. But there's just something about tapping into music that's lesser known, maybe not as appreciated, nearly forgotten. You know, some of these deep cuts and B-sides and, you know, lost tracks and stuff. And I know when I was younger, I used to listen to the radio a lot. I used to buy lots of greatest hits albums. And I'd buy a greatest hits album and think, yeah, this is the best music from this band. But then I would go back and listen to the actual albums that a lot of those songs came from, and I realized they were deeper songs that were even better than their hits. And that's true for, you know, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Van Halen, I mean, you name it, anybody. And that's also true for Humble Pie. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to the Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.